That was unusually long for my neck of it.
Isn't that wild?
What? We all know what happens. Well, and I was going to try to go the back way under the school, and I said, I'm going to be cautious. You really have to go.
Are you on? I am. Good evening, everyone. It is 4:30. I'd like to call the meeting of the Moorhead Public Service Commission to order. I would also, before we get to the agenda, I'm instructed to read these instructions. Any customers wishing to address the commission for items that are not on the agenda, please fill out the request to speak form located on the table by the elevators and give that to our administrative assistant over here on my right in attendance. And prior to speaking, if you would, please. Customers wishing to address the commission regarding a specific agenda item other than the rate hearings will be given an opportunity during the discussion of that item. Each customer will be given 3 minutes to address the commission. We are here to listen. If any follow-up or feedback will be done by email or anything that cannot be resolved this evening, we'll communicate. So with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to the agenda. Proposed.
One thing before we do that, I've been asked to remove item number 13 from the consent agenda. So we're going to be addressing something like that. But other than that, I don't think we have any other requests. So a motion to approve the agenda, then we'll get to the consent.
Motion. I second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same side. Now, in addition to item number 13, anything else of concern to folks? Councilmember White and I communicated a little bit earlier. We have a typo, so I'm not going to ask us to
I asked Nancy to
action.
take care of
We
it.
have a typo that we need to fix. But what I would like to do is make sure that the calculation that accompanied that typo goes with 6 and not 7. So if you just
Sure.
check
Yep.
the calculus on that. So. Okay, anything else with the consent? I'd entertain a motion.
Move to approve the consent.
Got a motion? Got a second? Got a motion and a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion is approved. Moving right along here. Customers to be heard. Anyone with us tonight that would like to address commission on any bit, as I said earlier, if it has anything to do with the rates, we'll deal with that in a little while. Okay. Old business. Hi, John.
Hi, Dave.
Got any old business?
Yes, I have a couple items here for it. I would just like to recognize Moorhead Public Service and its staff. I think in the Missouri River magazine, we had a notation of the Moorhead Public Service named a smart energy provider. So if we haven't seen that or people are aware of it, I would just ask Bill or Dennis to just give us more detail about that recognition and how it applies to the utility.
Good thought.
I'll let Dennis, or I think Travis worked on this as well, but Dennis can describe it. Thank you.
Travis Schmidt, Electrical Engineering Manager. The Smart Energy Provider designation is a designation through American Public Power Association. Last spring, we worked to submit our designation or request for designation on that. It was reviewed, and as of October 31st, or right around that time frame, we received notification that we received that designation from American Public Power Association. It looks at multiple different criterias. looks at, what you're doing on your distribution system. It looks at communication. It looks at several different items that you have. Unfortunately, I don't have everything in front of me tonight to talk to that completely.
Bill, do you want to add? Because with reading the article, I think it's a pretty significant recognition of the work that's being done within utility, so.
Yeah, I think it just takes I'm trying to figure out what the difference between this one and the RP3, which is the reliable public power designation.
Yeah, reliable public power looks more at just the reliability and what the entity is doing to, keep up the reliability of the system, and it changes every year. This is actually the Smart Energy Provider designation. This is the first year that it was available as well, too, and it looks at, smart technology, smart grid solutions. It looks at education pieces, multiple different pieces for that.
And sustainability and customer experience. So I'm reading from the article now.
Yep.
So basically it says, for smart energy program structures, energy efficiency, distributed energy programs, environmental and sustainability initiatives, and customer experience. So it's, those are the categories that we got the award for. So.
And I think as a commission, we should recognize that and thank the staff for the work that was done regarding that. The next item here, I just make the commission aware that I attended the council meeting last week, and there was discussion held, and I've talked to a few of the staff about this, so I think we'll get further information here about the city and the Johnson Control proposal that's being submitted. I talked a little bit to Bill, and I talked a little bit to Travis, so I think that's going to be some further information that we brought to us here, so we have a clear understanding of how the utility can be involved and cooperate with those plans here for it. So
I did reach out to Steve Moore, and he's going to look at meeting with us early in January.
good, very good, thank you. That's all I have.
The smart energy, just a couple more things on that one. It looks at smart energy program structure, energy efficiency and distribution energy programs, environmental and sustainability initiatives, and customer experiences. We had a GM report on it a couple weeks ago as well, too, or a month ago, sorry.
Okay, thanks, Travis.
Yep, thank you.
Ralph?
Yep, I have 3 items quick. First of all, to the city council members, thank you for approving the bonding and the sludge project. So thank you for doing that. Also, Councilwoman White mentioned in the last meeting that the way we have our scheduling on our website with the agendas, we started with the old ones first and the new ones last. We have switched that around since, I believe. So thanks to the team for that. And then the last one I had, Councilwoman Durant pointed that out after our meeting last time. We made a comment in the last meeting that Mark Moylanen on our team does the entire financial statement preparation. And we did some we have to do some clarification. He does all the numbers, and Ide Bailey does the Gatsby stuff, the footnotes, and the complex calculations. They do not charge us more for it, but just to clarify, Mark does the numbers, and Ide Bailey does the other stuff. Just want to make sure that we have clarified that, and thanks for pointing that out. So that's all I had.
And Heidi?
Thank you, Chair. On that note, I'm not going to string this out longer than I have to, but that meeting last time, it was frustrating at times because I think there were assumptions made about assumptions being made, and I think some of our city staff felt as if they had been, for lack of a better term, thrown under the bus or blamed for miscommunication when it wasn't miscommunication on their part. So I want to just go on record saying that that particular staff person did conduct herself, I thought, very well in the situation she was in. She had accurate information. There was miscommunication during the meeting about that accurate information, and she the particular staff person, she owned up and took responsibility for it, and it wasn't even her responsibility. So I just, I wanted to publicly say that I thought she handled herself very well. And we need to be careful about assumptions we make about assumptions.
Isn't that true? Yeah. All righty. Thank you, Heidi. Any other old business? Moving on to reports, I'd call right back on you, Heidi, from your role with City Council.
Ralph mentioned a couple things that I was going to report. The sludge facility. I think I called it the sludge factory during the council meeting, but
Yeah.
I thought that had kind of a nice ring. And as well as the bond issuance. We did get a presentation from Steve Moore on our red-rated items and the need for different improvements, different efficiencies in city-owned property. And we will be working with Johnson Controls, as John pointed out. I won't go into a whole lot of depth because I'll leave it up to Bill and Travis and perhaps Chris to communicate with Steve Moore on ways MPS could participate if they want. It seems like a pretty ideal opportunity to get those very expensive items, taken care of in a efficient and cost-effective way. And whether or not you have items that are red-rated, I'm not sure. But if you do, it's worth looking at and discussing with Steve Moore.
Yeah, we'll continue to take a look at those. We've kind of looked at it on the water side and didn't find anything on the electric side. They will be looking at the LED lighting.
Okay.
I think that's something that everybody is interested in. We haven't seen the specific numbers, which I think Johnson Controls is going to move ahead
Yeah.
on, and then we'll have more information
Right.
to look at decisions.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, we're good there. Members of the commission, anything to report from your activities? John already did. Well, I have something. I'll keep this short and sweet. Tonight is my last meeting as a member of this board. I hate having to say that, but work comes first, and my work with my full-time employer has kept me even from attending meetings in the last couple of months. I think I've missed 5 out of 6, which it just isn't acceptable. I wouldn't respect that of any of us if we were missing that kind of a schedule. And looking forward, the only thing that I see is that I'm going to have as many conflicts in the future as I have been having here recently. Sanford is growing. We're doing a lot of amazing things, but it seems that my role has kind of expanded and changed with that. And so as I look to the future with my calendar, I think it's best that we wrap this up here at the end of the year. And so with regret, but also with a lot of satisfaction in these years, I think going on 9 years now as a member of this group, I have enjoyed this tremendously. It has been challenging. Sometimes it's been frustrating, but overall, I've spent a lot of years getting to know new friends and making lasting relationships. I respect the work that you all do so much, and what I have said to Bill and to our city manager is that if there is anything that I can do that isn't on a set schedule for Tuesday evenings and so forth, if there's anything I can do along the way to continue to help out, I would really love to do that. We have challenges yet, and as we go forward, I'm just hopeful that we can start to work through some of the things that that have tended to divide us over the years. And so with that, I have a letter for you, Bill, that you can do whatever you need to do with to make it official. But I just want to say thank you. And been a great experience, and something that Linda and I have both really enjoyed. So thank you very much for putting up with me for these 9 years. So that's the end of my report.
Dave, I would like to thank you for your 9 years of service. The city of Moorhead's a better place for it. Thank you.
Moving right along here, get out of this phase. Mr. General Manager, do you have a report?
Well, I have a written report attached. If there's any questions on that, I can answer those. Otherwise, I would just ditto what Mary just said, and thank you for your 9 years of service, and the staff really appreciates, I know that because I've heard it, really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Moving right along, item number F under reports is to accept report on potential request to the mayor and city council to add the Buffalo Wellfield expansion project to the city of Moorhead's legislative priorities. This is a biggie.
This is a big deal. This is one of those red-rated items that you were talking about. In the next few years, we're going to need more water supply, especially if the current wet cycle ends like they all do in a drought. And if it's a long-term drought, we are going to need more water resources. We don't typically talk with red-rated items or yellow-rated items or green-rated items, but after this came up at one of the last meetings, I think the one I presented at, where they talked about the red-rated items, this is probably one of those. And Chris can talk a little bit about it. And this, you don't really have to approve this today because the legislative session won't be starting until probably February or maybe January. Because we can bring this back and talk about it some more. In fact, I think we've got it on our schedule for our planning meeting at the January meeting. And I don't think we've done this before, where we actually asked the council to put it on their legislative agenda. I talked about it in October when I spoke in front of the council, but this provides more background information on that. Water supply, as you know, Ralph is on the Red River Basin Commission. Dave, you've been on the what's that group called again? The
Valley Prosperity Partnership.
Yep.
And the Water Resource Group.
Yep. So Valley Prosperity Partnership. Water is very crucial to economic expansion, so we don't want to run short. Chris, give us a little background.
Yeah, Chris Knutson, Water Division Manager. Just coming off the heels of the sludge project, we know that was a very expensive project for Moorhead Public Service, and this is another potential expensive project, and really wanted to provide a high-level overview of the proposed Buffalo Wellfield expansion project and some of the funding opportunities that exist for the project. As Bill alluded to, our intent would be to provide further detail with respect to the project at the next meeting, but just really kind of wanted to lay out a few of the options and just highlight kind of where we're at in the project and what we're looking forward toward. Of particular note in the item, we note that it's a $25 million project as a whole, and that $25 million consists of two phases. Phase one is the replacement of the existing Highway 10 line. That line was put in the late 1950s, so that's a line that we need to get replaced. And then the second part is a roughly $12.5 million project where we would connect that replaced Highway 10 line with a new well field, and that would provide us with the expanded water capacity in terms of a long-term drought scenario. So water supply, a big issue. North Dakota is investing a lot of resources with respect to the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. And we've looked at this Buffalo Wellfield expansion project for probably 20 years, and we've been developing those plans for a long time. And one of the steps we took several years ago now, but was the development of the Buffalo Aquifer Management Plan. And the management plan really defined kind of how much available capacity there would be on the Buffalo Aquifer for a long-term drought scenario. And so that was a big milestone for us, but really the next step is to start talking about the possibilities for how we approach funding. Because it's such a large project, I think we're going to have to consider some kind of the outside-the-box alternatives for funding this project. And so we're really just trying to highlight that this is a big need coming up, and want to start talking about it sooner than later.
Questions, Heidi?
Thank you, Chair. Chris, are you thinking, asking the council to put it on this session's list or next session, for 2022?
It would probably be 2022.
Okay.
Just
I
because.
I wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, we didn't specify that in the
Okay.
agreement, but I think that would be, from a timing standpoint,
Yeah.
probably allow the city staff
Yep.
a little time to prepare, and on a preliminary engineering standpoint, probably allow us a little time to prepare. But even 2022, from the city's perspective, from MPS's perspective, is right around the corner.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that's a good idea, and getting this into the hands of city staff, city engineers, and coordinating and communicating with them will be important. But I like that you are thinking outside the box, and that we are looking at other ways to get this funded versus rate increases. So I like that, and I think this gives us time to get it on the list and prepare our legislators for what might be coming.
And I think Bill has done a good job starting the conversations with legislators, just making them aware of this
Yep.
big need, because water supply, quite frankly, is a big issue
Exactly.
all across the state. So it's, from a legislative standpoint, probably not something new to them, that they hear it all the time, but new for Moorhead, in a sense that we haven't really approached this funding mechanism or looked at it quite yet.
Yeah, and can you just quickly maybe talk about the quality of the water in that additional well field that you'd be looking at? I mean, is it, we pride ourselves on the best water in Minnesota. This isn't going to be no different. This isn't going to impact any of that, or?
Yeah, so, just broadly, right now, we get 20 to 30% of our annual water supply comes from the Buffalo Aquifer. And so the Buffalo Aquifer has very, very good water quality. This water would be very similar to the water that we are already getting from the Buffalo Aquifer.
Same aquifer, just a different site?
Same
Yep.
aquifer, just another well field.
Okay.
And that additional well field really would protect us in terms of a 10-year 1930-style drought. And that's really what the state of North Dakota is focusing on for the Red River Valley Water Supply Project for Fargo and Grand Forks and others.
And for us, there are some of us who are kind of aquifer geeks, and we like to keep track of our aquifers. This isn't going to deplete it, or it's not going to harm it. We will be making sure that we're recharging it in a sustainable way, correct?
Yeah, so sustainable usage has really been a big deal for Minnesota over the last 10 years now. And we try to be as thoughtful as we can be with respect to usage and making sure that whatever usage we do is done in a sustainable manner and that we're not harming the aquifer. So really the addition of this potential well field would allow us to distribute that usage. Right now we're really concentrating our usage on the northern part of the aquifer. If we can get a southern well field, it actually allows us to kind of expand the usage area of the aquifer. So it's a bigger area that we're pulling from. And
So it spreads it out a little bit
Spreads
more.
it out.
So one area isn't getting pulled down lower than another area.
the idea is that if you pull it from too much from one area, you can
Yeah.
actually do some irreparable damage to the
Okay.
aquifer. So
Right.
that's part of the intent, but obviously a big part of the intent is also to capture some more capacity during that long-term drought scenario.
Yeah, that's good information. Thank you.
We actually made the decision to start to go this direction about 3 years ago, and so
Yep.
I'm glad to hear that we're making some progress that way. I would imagine that it'd be a good idea to start educating whoever is our voice or our advocate in St. Paul. I don't know who that is any longer, but someone, whoever is the lobbyist advocate for the city,
okay.
probably ought to be brought into the loop on this. So.
Well, even our local legislators,
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. And we have mentioned that a couple of different times as we met with them, that this was coming.
Yeah.
So it's timely, and I was going to say, we're going to try to do anything here in 35 days with the upcoming legislative session. We're really late, but
Yeah.
but if we're looking out a couple of years into the future, we're okay.
It was noted in the top part. I missed it. It is 2022 that we specify. That's really our intent.
Ted?
Just to even add to that, so you, just to familiarize yourself.
The people can't hear you. Come
Yeah,
over here.
on our side. So as Councilmember Duran mentioned, that for this legislative session, we've already put in our goals.
Yeah.
But even we have on our side, we have a legislative work group. And so that would be one of the things after you've worked through staff, that would be, I know for those of us, the council members that are on it, that if once that we've decided to collaborate on it, that could be something where we might be able to, have you educate us so that we could be out there speaking on it. So there's always a few, I think we typically have 3 council members who work with our lobbyists, and we'll go to St. Paul and we meet with our local elected officials. And so knowing who those folks are and being, making sure that they have the good information would be helpful so we could be good advocates for it.
Sure. You bet. Thanks. Josh?
Chris, I'm not sure where I read it, but has there been some expressed interest in Fargo having access to our aquifer?
I think it gets mentioned from time to time. There'd be a great deal of regulatory hurdles for that to happen. Just broad statement.
That would certainly create challenge for the aquifer if there was that much more demand put on it. So,
From MPS's perspective, absolutely a concern.
yeah, all right, okay, thank you. And then just a little more clarification here. Bill and Chris, are you recommending that we submit a report or a resolution, or what actually are you asking us to do with this?
Well, we try and be real clear on the titles. We work pretty hard to get the titles and the recommendations figured out. So right now, we're just accepting a report on the potential request to the mayor and city council to add this to their legislative priorities. So as Chris mentioned, 2022 is when we're going to get more serious about it. So really right now, it is just a report. So,
Sorry.
go ahead.
The intent would be, the next item we'd bring to you would be where we would request that they add it to the priorities for 2022. That's our intent. So we really wanted to provide this as a feedback opportunity for staff.
Thank you, Chair. I think with that step, or at that next step, I think it would be helpful to have action steps that outline what actions you're going to take to communicate with city staff, how you're going to get the legislative group involved, who's going to reach out to the lobbyist, who can reach out to the representatives. The sooner they're aware of this and the sooner we get it on our radar, the more prepping we can do and the more collaboration we can do. And we know projects like this are not, not easily funded. So the more time St. Paul has to look at it and get it on their radar, the better it would be.
Certainly.
Thanks.
And one thing too, we still continue to be involved in the LAWA discussions, the water pipe coming from the west, and as that's taken shape, that may influence our decision or not. We will see. We're currently looking for that at a $1.2 to $1.4 billion price tag, and the state of North Dakota is looking at a 75% cost share. So we're talking about $450 million. On the local side, and we don't know whether we would even be included in that. So, but for disclosure, we are still involved in that. We still know what's going on, and we'll make a decision at some point.
When we made our decision 3 years ago, though, there was a significant difference in what our investment was going to need to be to participate in the Missouri River project. That's right. And this solution that we came up with. I don't remember the numbers.
We did a pretty thorough cost analysis at that time. One of the assumptions, I believe, was that we used a 90% cost share at that time, because that was the funding model that was current. As Ralph mentioned, an important change has been the reduction in allocation to 75%. So that would have a huge impact on our potential, if more was to participate, be a substantial increase in what our initial investment from a capital side would be. So this project compared very favorably toward that project at that time at a 75% cost share. My thoughts are this is the most efficient and economical way to go.
And it's a 75% cost share at a much higher number, because I think the initial
Correct.
90-10
That-
was about $1 billion.
Yeah,
or
so
900
it's gone.
million,
It's
and now
also gone
1.4
up.
billion at 75%, so, yeah.
Keeps going up. Heidi, again?
Thank you, Chair. Chris, in your knowledge, your expertise, is Canada going to be okay with that, taking water from the Missouri and dumping it in the Red? Is this Minnesota DNR going to be okay with that? I mean, is that all logistically even possible?
They can.
Chris, if I can step in, so we already got a letter from Canada.
I'm sorry, what was that?
We already got a letter from Canada.
I was
So there's already some
assuming.
concerns.
Yeah.
We think the Canadian concerns can be resolved by treating the water to a certain standard, to almost a drinking water standard. So basically, we'd have to treat it to drinking water, pump it into the river, and then treat it again for those who are taking it out. So that's one of the concerns, but we have gotten a letter from Canada. I think the state of Missouri has some say in
Yeah.
it as well. We just heard in a meeting last week that we now may have some concerns from the tribes that are adjacent to the Missouri River. So that's the latest. So I don't know where this is going to go. And the numbers too, and John just mentioned that to me as well, I forgot to mention. The numbers that we have do not include O&M. That's just the
Right.
building of the pipeline and the pumping stations
And not all the
that.
chemicals would be part of all the OMB.
That's on top of that.
Yeah.
And once, the pipeline would always have to run at a certain capacity to keep the water
Yeah.
from being not skunky. And then
Another
at
very
full bore.
expensive water project.
Very expensive, but if you don't have groundwater, right, that's the way to go. So there's a lot of variables. We are still we continue to look at it. Maybe there's some cooperation we can do with City of Fargo in this project, but right now, I believe it's the right way to look at both projects and see what we should be doing. And I think, Chris, wasn't a big expense for us, not necessarily the project itself, but we have to build in a water plant with a membrane. Wasn't there something there?
It could have been part of it too, depending on the mixing from the Red River. But even just from a initial capital standpoint, getting the pipeline of the water to Moorhead isn't.
Also, Ralph, it only gets it to Fargo, it doesn't get it to Moorhead.
Yeah.
So that's an additional hurdle.
Right.
Some conversations just never come to an end, do they? We've been talking about this
Even
for a long time.
For your entire tenure, for
And
sure,
I think I
and
asked
longer.
the same questions 3 years ago.
I think you did. I think
I
you
don't have my
did.
notes somewhere.
Yeah, okay. Anything further on this before I guess you'd like a motion to at least accept it?
You could accept the report, yeah.
We got it on the record for the meeting, yeah. Well, if that's all we have, I'd entertain a motion.
I move to accept the report.
I'll second. Second.
Got a motion and a second to accept the report on the Wellfield expansion project. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion is approved. Rolling right along to item number 13, Bill. I was asked to remove this from,
Yeah, I'll ask Chris Knutson to come up again and talk about this one. We removed it from consent because we were not going to need to do that at this time. So we have good news on this one.
Yeah. So one of the primary chemicals we use at the water treatment plant for coagulation is called ferric sulfate. And we had been using dry ferric sulfate for quite some time in our water treatment plant. Several years ago, the production for that dry ferric sulfate pretty much kind of fizzled out due to a factory issue with the supplier. So since that time, we actually had to convert our water treatment plant to feeding liquid ferric sulfate. And so we've been doing that since that time several years ago. One of the issues we have with feeding liquid ferric sulfate is it's rather time consuming. It involves a lot of staff incorporation because we just didn't have that as part of the original water treatment plant design. So the intent of this task order was to complete some modifications within the water treatment plant that would make that process more efficient. However, during our process of development of chemical specifications for 2020, we discovered that the dry ferric sulfate supply chain may be available again. So we'll be going through our bid process for that and hopefully using dry ferric sulfate and saving some potential money for this upgrade that now would not be needed. So we'll continue to monitor it. We're optimistic that we potentially could save up to about $100,000 if this upgrade isn't needed. So.
Any questions for Chris on this? John?
Chris, at the council meeting, you were asked a question about how we go about our bid process or how we get chemicals and that sort of thing. I think that would be a good just summary here again for our listeners as well.
Yeah, it's actually an item on the meeting agenda tonight that was under the consent agenda. We purchased slightly over $1 million, I believe $1.1 or $1.2 million worth of chemicals every year to treat water. We have our specifications on the consent agenda tonight, but we do take public bids on all of our chemicals, and publicly bid it, and we have year-long contracts, and it's a big portion of our expense from a water treatment standpoint. So, and those expenses have gone up considerably due to water quality issues associated with the Red River. So we've through this wet cycle the last several years, we've seen some significant increases in chemical use due to degraded water quality on the Red.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anything further? So we're just not taking action on this, so we just
I would recommend, my recommendation would be just to table the item.
just table the item?
Yep,
Okay.
and if we need it, presumably we'd bring it back at a later time, but don't need to commit right now.
Okay. So entertain a motion to table.
I'll make a motion to table item 13.
Item 13 is tabled. Item number 17, golly, the long process comes to fruition here. Item to approve the final 2020 strategic plan, budget, and rates. Who do we start with? Nancy, are you up first?
I can start. Nancy Lund, Admin and Finance Manager. So we've been working on our 2020 budget for a number of months now, and everything's come together. We've done the planning piece of it. We've done rate hearings about the middle of October. We've had a comment period for all of our customers, a 30-day comment period for written comments. We received no written comments back on that. So just to summarize what 2020 is going to look like for us, on the electric side, good news again this year, no electric rate increase. That is due primarily to the no increases in our purchase power costs and our transmission costs. So those two sources have been holding firm on prices for purchase power and transmission. We'll just see a very small increase of about $281,000 in purchase power and transmission. That's our largest piece of the budget. Of the $44 million in revenue that we take in, about $20.1 million of that goes to those purchase power and transmission costs. The second biggest piece of that budget of the $44 million is the $9 million that'll be going to the City of Moorhead in transfers. So that's fixed with the transfer agreement. We've got a variable piece on the capital improvement fund, but that number's in place, and that's about $9 million, so about a 1.1 increase in that. With those two being the biggest pieces, probably the next one is the capital projects that we'll be taking on next year will be over $5 million in capital projects, and those will be funded from operations, so we have no plans to issue any new debt on the electric side next year. We'll be using operations and a combination of operations and our reserves to fund those capital projects. At the end of the year, that's going to leave us with sufficient unrestricted reserves. We'll have about the other piece we're going to do is we're going to pay off about $6 million in debt, outstanding debt from 2010, high interest rate. We're going to pay it off with reserves. That's going to take out of the electric budget, about $6 million. So after all those operations, the payment of the debt, the payment of the capital accounts, we're projected to have about 273 days of cash in reserves at the end of 2020. Our policy is at 200 days on the electric side, and so we've got about an extra 73 days of cash on hand, and that's about $8 million, and that is dedicated to automated metering infrastructure projects in 2021. So we build the reserves up to our minimum level. They'll go up above that. We save them up for a project and spend them down in the next few years. So we'll have a couple ups and downs on those reserve balances within the next 2 years as we do AMI, and then a few years down the line, we've got a substation that we plan to also fund with cash at that time. So on the electric side, good news. So 44 million in revenue, no rate increase. On the water side, we're looking at an overall 6% increase in water rates. We'd been looking at increases a little bit higher earlier in the budget process, but we're able to bring that down to 6% by leveling out rate increases for the next few years. In addition, we'll continue phasing in a fire hydrant facility fee. We used to call it fire protection. We've changed the name on it a little bit to be a little bit more descriptive, but that's the cost of the water infrastructure that supports the hydrants and the towers and everything that contribute to fire protection for the city of Moorhead. On the water side, with our 6% increase, we'll have about $10 million in revenue. And as Chris was talking earlier, out of that 10 million, we are projected to spend about 1.2, or 12% of that goes directly to chemical costs. Labor costs are another high item. Debt payments are another big piece of that budget on the water side. After those items, we transfer about 5.8% to the city of Moorhead also, so that's about a payment of about $631,000, a little over 5.8% on that. Capital projects on the water side are intense. We've got $12.2 million of capital projects, some of which we've shifted from 2019 to 2020. We've talked about the sludge facility. We've talked about the water tower before. So those two big pieces the main construction on both of those will happen in 2020. And so we've included that in our capital spending for 2020. On reserves on the water side, so the end of the year, what's our checkbook look like? Water reserves are projected at 3.54 million, which is 198 days of cash on hand, which is slightly below our target of 225 for days cash on hand. However, in our planning, we do build that up and do meet that floor or that level 1 reserve within a couple of years too. So as we look at the bonding that'll take place next year in our credit rating, as long as we have a plan to have those in place, we should be okay on that. And so we'll be at 198, but bringing that back up to the minimum 225 days within a couple of years. So overall, well, and I guess on the council side too, they approved about $14 million in bonding that will take place in the spring of 2020, which will fund those large capital improvements on the water side. Overall, so MPS overall will have about $55 million in revenue next year, about 45 of it being from electric and about 10 being from water. And we talked a little bit about the reserve balances. You know, our targets are based on Moody's rating services for municipal utilities, and so we're squarely, you know, within that range on reserves. And we do 5 and 10 year forecasts on that to make sure we keep those numbers in line with policy. The overall impact to the customer, so the water rate increase is going to be $2.26 to the average residential water user. That's going to include the 6% rate increase plus the fire infrastructure fee, $2.26 increase in water, an overall 1.71 increase in the Moorhead Public Service part of the bill for an average customer. Any questions?
Okay. Before questions, members of the Budget Committee, any comments before we go to questions? We kind of drafted you into service. I remember that meeting.
I recall too.
It was a good experience.
And we put you to work.
It was a good experience.
No, I do that.
Chris?
I would say that the process went very smoothly. I appreciated the walkthrough that I had with Nancy and Mark, and I was pleased with the numbers and the research that had gone into setting those rates for our ratepayers.
Thank you.
Questions for Nancy or Bill? We've been kind of going over it for a while. The numbers aren't surprising anyone, I don't believe. So, John?
Nancy, overall, you're looking at pretty flat revenues, and I think that's a trend for maybe potentially some time. Is that any concerns or issues that is going to have impact on our future budgeting?
Revenues on the electric side are flat. undoubtedly, we're not seeing a lot of growth, even though sometimes we'll see growth within the city of Moorhead. We'll see new rooftops and things like that. It doesn't equate to a large increase in electric sales for us. And normally, flat sales are good for us, or not negative. Let's say they're not negative, because every new kilowatt that we have to purchase is at a higher price than our base kilowatts. So we've got two different suppliers. We've got WAPA, which is a great low rate, and we've got Missouri River Energy Services. And so as the city grows, we're buying more of the expensive power. So non-growth does help us keep our rates lower.
Anybody else?
I was just going to say that's a really good question, and we're going to talk about that a bit more. Does growth help us or not? We're going to talk about that when we talk about economic development rates and our policy. And we've got some changes to make because that type of growth all does come from Missouri River Energy Services. So our rate incentive may not be shouldn't be as generous as what it is right now. So we're going to be looking at some changes there. And it's a good time to do it because Missouri River also has some economic development incentives that we can pass through. So it's a good time to be looking at it. But we'll be looking at that, I believe, in January. Mm-hmm. So you can look forward to that. But it comes on the heels of Nancy talking about how growth generally, no growth or slow growth generally doesn't hurt us. The opposite of that is a lot of growth can drive rates up. So it's something we look at real closely, and we'll be looking at that in January.
Bill, is that a conversation that you're going to have with Derek LaPointe as well?
We have had that conversation as well. Yep, when we've looked at especially the expansion of customers, yep. We've been talking about that. So he's aware of
he's the
what we're
voice
talking
out
about.
There on those incentives,
yep.
As well as, I know Dennis is as well, but
yep.
In fact, he's asked for a couple of meetings here in the near future to
yep.
discuss.
Yep.
So,
yeah, Dennis and Travis have been working on those together and talking with Derek, and I've talked with Derek, and yep.
Cool. Alrighty. Anything further? Questions, comments from the members? Heidi, your alternate is raising her hand. So.
Do you want to ask about hydrants? I just wanted to bring this up because I know that we talked about this at our council meeting, and there were some concerns just about the fire protection charge. So I know we've had a lot of questions from citizens about that because often they will think like, oh, this is going to the fire department. And again, this isn't anything that goes to the fire department. It's, and so I know that the several council members had asked about clarification and why this has to be listed in such a way. And I have to say, I don't really see just changing the name to fire hydrant facilities fee as addressing the issue that was raised at council. And my understanding, and you can provide clarification, is this isn't anything, we're not putting in new hydrants, we're not upgrading our hydrants or anything like this. And Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was that the fee is because we live in a city, so we have to have fire hydrants. So, so I guess if you could provide further justification and clarification of why we have to list this as a separate fee when it's really just part of being a city. And so I think for consumers, for our citizens, it's confusing. They feel like this is something that's going to the budget for our fire department when it's really just what is required for us to be a city.
Well, I'm not sure how far you want me to go into a justification for it. I would touche you and say the city has unbundled a number of their fees onto the bill. So if this is confusing, then street lighting is possibly just as confusing. The justification for it really is, and you mentioned it, we're a city, we provide hydrants. You can leave it bundled in with the water rates, or you could unbundle it. We've chosen to unbundle it so that we can, show what the difference in cost is for the capacity that's required to provide fire protection. And so we could debate that for a while and take a look at whether we pull it back into the water. But if we do pull it back into the water, is the city looking at pulling back a lot of the things they've unbundled back into their general rate? So, I mean, it could be an interesting, like I said, touche, a little bit back and forth on how we should list things on the MPS bill. It's probably more like previous President Ken Norman said, there's art and there's science into the establishment of rates. This probably falls in that art area. You could, again, leave it bundled in there, or you could pull it out. When to do that is probably part of what the commission can decide.
And just the second part of that is, could you explain why there's a rate increase? Are we upgrading fire hydrants or increasing the number of fire hydrants or anything like that that would explain to citizens why there's a rate increase, why there's an increase in the fee?
Yeah, Nancy's nodding her head. She might be able to tell you, but I believe it's still a phase-in of those rates over a number of years to get them to where the cost of service is.
We started with our water rate study in 2012. We separated out the fire portion of that. And the reason we did that is the city charter limits us to $40 per hydrant per year billed to the city council. So what we're doing is collecting the rest of those costs for the fire hydrant capacity and infrastructure from the rest of the customer base. So if the charter didn't have the $40 limit on it, we would not be including those in our water revenues at this time. So that's a piece of it. If we were to bundle it back in, it would actually show, it would sound like another 6 or 7% rate increase to rebundle it right now, because the revenue from the fire protection fee is about $754,000, so a 6 to 7% increase in water rates to rebundle, and it also keeps our rates more competitive looking if we do have it unbundled too. So for cost comparison to other utilities, it keeps that rate slightly lower.
Maybe just an impression from the point of view of someone who won't be in the next conversation, but the city council has completely changed since the days of creating that phase-in of this hydrant fee. I don't think we're going to have complete understanding of this with 5 minutes of conversation tonight, but I would really suggest that maybe because this was something that a council did a long time ago, and a commission that is completely turned over did a long time ago. It might be that maybe just a little primer on fire protection and hydrants and so forth might really be a useful thing here sometime in the near future, rather than trying to understand the whole thing tonight. We've been phasing this in during my tenure, and so there's been a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, but I might suggest that you try to create a conversation around this so that the members of the council can be brought up to speed on something that's really been kind of rolling along here for a number of years. If that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. And especially talking about our water cost of service study, because we do take a look at the cost of service. And, our largest water customer is Bush Agricultural Resources, and we're, always very concerned about whether they're going to expand or shut down, and they're very sensitive to the water rates. So I'd have to look at the cost of service study again, but taking some of the fire protection and unbundling it, at the same time, we probably held those rates down so that we could encourage them to expand is another, and I'd have to look back at the cost service study, but that might have been another factor that we considered at the time we were doing this. Again, making sure that everyone is paying the appropriate cost, and again, it's an art, the appropriate cost for fire protection versus industrial production, those types of things.
We probably make this sound more complex than it really is, but a conversation around how it is that this was established and how it was parceled out to the coming years would probably be helpful. So, anything further on that particular point? Shall we move on? I think if there isn't anything else as far as specifics to look at, I'd probably, at this point, entertain a motion to approve. I don't have the agenda in front of me right now.
Number 19.
We are on number 17? Yeah. Number 17. I'd entertain a motion to approve the final 2020 strategic plan, budget, and rates.
I'll make that motion to approve the 2020 strategic plan, budget, and rates.
I have a motion. I have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion is approved. Thank you very much. Thank you for the discussion. Moving on, Mandy, I probably messed up at the beginning of the meeting because I have an item number 19 that actually isn't the listed item. So to be totally appropriate and according to the rules, I'd entertain a motion to add substitute number item 19 to our agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to add substitute item number 19 to the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Item number 19. Chris, this yours?
Yeah. This item is with respect to the 21st Street Underpass project. If you'll remember at the last commission meeting, an item was brought to the commission with respect to some temporary measures needed by the electric division for a slope failure that occurred on that project. This is a similar type agreement tonight in front of you with respect to the water lines for the project. Brief background on kind of what's happened with respect to water line relocation for the project. Construction was actually complete for relocation of both the river line and then the finished water line last year. So we actually worked with the city and the contractor. That construction was completed last year. On October 29th of this year, there was a slope failure adjacent to both the finished and river water lines. That slope failure caused a pretty significant loss of water on the finished water line. We were able to service was maintained on the river transmission line. However, both of those lines will need to be relocated on a temporary basis to allow the contractor to continue work in the area. And so because it's really a unique item in the construction of this project, we felt it appropriate to try to address some of the timeline and some of the concerns with respect to that temporary relocation with an agreement with the contractor, Ames, for the project. One thing that we've evaluated is that originally the contractors proposed relocating both the finished water line and the raw water line. It appears as though we may not need to relocate the finished water line, so we'd provide a little relief to that contractor in that regard, but we're going to require, obviously we need to relocate the river transmission line. One of the things that we'll focus on is shortening or truncating the timelines for shutdown on that river transmission line to as short a time as possible. So it's been presented as a 2-week shutdown on the river transmission line. That's a pretty significant shutdown for us. We made a lot of planning provisions when this was completed last year, and we just based on the nature of the unexpected slope failure, we haven't been able to plan as significantly this year for that. Anyways, I think the gist of the item is that we really need an agreement with Ames to solidify some of the timelines for shutdown, as the river line is a huge part of our production capacity. John Bolger provided the kind of template for the agreement, and then I worked on drafting it, but it's still in what I would say early draft form. What we're looking for tonight is approval of the draft agreement with subject to John Bolger's final revision. So staff would work with John to finalize that draft agreement that would really solidify terms with Ames with respect to the temporary relocation of both of the finished and river water lines.
Chris, is the essence of the agreement already proposed to Ames as well?
I would say that those discussions are ongoing. So okay. Ames has submitted a plan to MPS based on, we actually got that plan last night. So it's still, I'd say, we'll be working with Ames to develop the final plan, but there's still a lot to be fleshed out in terms of details.
So you're asking us to approve something that really isn't really ready to approve yet?
I think the essence of what we want is there.
Yeah.
It's just that if the nature of the construction is that if we wait for the next meeting, I believe the plan has them completing this work around January 10th or prior to. It would be difficult for us to wait, although it's certainly a possibility we could work with them to finalize it to a little bit more detail. But we really wanted to present the issue tonight and kind of get it in front of you. Certainly we can wait, but we'd like to recommend approval tonight.
Mr. Bolger, further comment?
Chris and I have had several conversations about this. There's an impetus on the river water side for Ames to get it done quickly, and I want to have that same impetus with the finished water line. We're also taking a look at possibly dividing the times rather than 2 weeks for one move. When there's the possibility of 2 moves, it would be 1 week per move to get it done. And Chris and I are in agreement that that would be a good formula, but we don't have approval from the commission on that yet.
All right. Questions, folks?
I mean, with the obligations mostly being on Ames, I don't have an issue approving something that's not totally complete yet.
That was kind of where I was going.
Yep.
John?
In item E, you note that there's a 10,000 per day penalty, if you would say. But I don't see any clarification stated that, or what the cost of this would be, if any, to the utility. And if there are expenses related to this, who's responsible?
Because the slope failure would fall, so when the slope failure happened, it's really in an active construction site, so the contractor has means and methods over how the wall and the river line relocation is done. The expense presumably would not fall to Moorhead Public Service because SRF dictated where that line should go. They took off too much material, or the material was too unstable, there was a slope failure. They're responsible to correct it. So the $10,000 per day was in the original contract, and the essence of the agreement would be to hold that provision with this agreement that was in the original contract.
So again, clarification with Ralph, Ames is entirely responsible for completing this and will assume all expenses related to it.
That's been what was represented to me, yes.
But do we have that in this document?
Commissioner, it's not in there yet. As Chris said, he was still having conversations with Ames today. And when we spoke early this afternoon, I just didn't have enough time set aside to be able to draft that. But we will make it clear in the agreement that we're not accepting any responsibility for the cost of moving. We had our contract with them on what would be done, and it's a problem they're having with their end of the construction that's causing this.
Okay, thank you.
So what we could do is maybe a motion that we approve it, provided that there will be no language in the final agreement that holds us responsible for any cost.
Yeah. And then subject to John's final approval as well.
It almost sounded like a motion.
I thought so.
Yeah, was that so too, Chris?
Yeah, I did too.
Mandy, did you get that beautiful piece of literature there?
Did you get that all, Mandy? Most of it?
Not just watching a lot of TV.
Yeah. Yeah, really, it's on tape. So, okay.
I'm not sure if I really understood it or not, but I'll second it.
I think I got a second, but if you're serious about that.
I am
motion.
serious about
Okay,
that.
so that's a motion. I believe Chris seconded it.
No, he did.
Or you did? Okay, I thought it came from the other side, okay. Okay, I got a motion and a second.
So motion is we
Restate it.
approve, conditioned on no obligations, no expenses on MPS, and conditioned on council's final approval.
No, yeah, council.
Yeah, council.
SEL Council.
SEL.
Yes.
Sounds.
My German accent. I'll mix this up. So that's my motion. I
Okay.
stand by it.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Discussion from any of the other members? Chris?
That $10,000 per day penalty is still part of that language as well? Okay,
Oh, yeah.
all right.
Anyone else? I'll call the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion is approved. That was item number 19, I believe. Unless we have something to close for, I don't have language here to close. Deb?
I just wanted to mention one thing as your last agenda item is their upcoming meetings. And I know that, that your general manager was going to look into the availability of this space. And I can actually confirm the city manager mentioned to me, this is available if you're interested. Although on January 7th, that's the only date they just happened to book something. But otherwise, right, other than that, this Tuesday time is available. And as an added bonus, there's candy in the drawer up there. So, but it is available, and I know it's a nice, accessible, and as Councilmember Duran mentioned at the last meeting, you know, having a space that is open and accessible to everybody, and you're very welcome to use the space.
Yeah, we did check on that, and yeah, the 7th, this room isn't available, so we'd plan to meet out there. August 25th, which is actually the time we typically would meet here, has a conflict in it as well. Park Advisory Board is here from 4 to 5:30, so that would be the other one that we would look at. So I think we'll, talk about that and figure out what we're going to do.
Figure it out.
Okay. With that, John?
One final item.
One final item.
I, too, would like to express my thanks to Dave here, but also, at last few meetings here, I have been requesting that we look at establishing the old Commissioners Advisory Board, or committee is what I'll call it. It's probably not appropriate, but I would like to certainly invite Dave to be a member and a participant.
You saying I'm an old commissioner?
You are now.
I haven't adjourned yet, but I'm almost there.
All right, so I would.
Well, thank you.
I would-
I would like that opportunity. So. All right, well, if we don't have any other business,
Move to adjourn.
got a motion?
Second.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much.